Okay, hey, here we are at another new Inspired Good Fat Life podcast. And today I am so excited about our special guest, and we'll get there in just a moment. But first, I have to give a shout out or draw attention to Good Fat Life, our latest issue. It's really cool. Not that I'm prejudiced by any means, but it is. We have some amazing writers and thought leaders in our Good Fat Life community. And so if you want to hear more, check out at goodfatlife.com, and you can read some of it, and you can subscribe and see our events and our podcasts and all that good stuff. So that said, I want to introduce today's guest, and that is Laurel Decker. Right?
Hi.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So Laurel and I are in this most amazing, it's a networking group, but I refer to it as a warm hug.
Yeah.
Right?
It is.
Group that meets at the Brighton Lighthouse here in Brighton, Michigan. And it's just a wonderful group of people. And today we generally start out with a cool quote. Kathy, our facilitator. So today was, what good is an idea if it remains an idea? Try, experiment, integrate, fail, try again, change the world. And this is a quote by Simon Sinek, who does amazing stuff. I love his work, and everybody in the room was inspired by it today, I would say, right?
Yeah, it did. It got us all on a nice path of helping us kind of really dial in on what we're trying to do, and to recognize that it's okay if we mess up. It's okay if we, aren't the best at it every time, but it's that, keep on going. And it definitely got a really interesting conversation going. I loved it.
Yeah. And it's, so one of the things also is, and I like to say, start where you are, it's okay, right? Because we have to start somewhere. And with Good Fat, so we're going to just talk about Good Fat Life for a second, and then transition into some of the things that Laurel's been going to that are they're fascinating to me, the journey that you've had and been on, and kind of what it's brought you to, right, today.
Right.
And everybody was so inspired by it. So like with Good Fat Life, I knew that I wanted to live more intentionally. I wanted to feel better. And I knew that in order to do that, I needed help. And I wanted to learn what was available, the resources that were available, and also where I was kind of sabotaging myself over and over, and to build a community of people that I could go through life with as I grow older. And so Good Fat came out for, I'll give you the 30 second. It came out of a collaboration I had with a nutritional chiropractor who was seeing so many of his patients that were not feeling well because they weren't eating enough good fat. So fast forward, and so I started eating a lot more good fat and paying attention to and researching, and found, oh my gosh, when I just made this little change, these things happened. And we were talking, and so tell me about your breakfast.
Yeah, so I made myself some fat coffee this morning because I knew it was going to be kind of a busy morning. I had a meeting, and then I had our group network, and I never would have imagined that I would then be in a podcast. But with the good fat that I put into that, it sustains me for such a long time that I now I had a few pecans, but I'm satisfied, and I'm not, starving, and I'm able to think clearly. And that just has kind of been something, once I started exploring putting fat into my diet, that one stuck. I've been doing that ever since I started drinking coffee, which was only about 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
But
and
it's a treat.
What good fat do you use?
What good fat?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at what I'm eating throughout the day, it's a lot of salmon, avocados, and nuts, and, that sort of thing. In my coffee to start the day, that's a grass-fed butter and coconut oil and a little bit of stevia.
Got it. Okay.
And some
it's
cinnamon.
Delicious. Oh, it's delicious. It's perfect.
Yeah, I actually, I let Brian try some of it the other day, and he's so dramatic, but he's funny because he fell to his knees and he goes, "That reminds me of cinnamon toast when I was a kid," and so that was kind of funny. It kind of
and actually, it would. You're right.
Yeah,
it would,
because I put the cinnamon in there and it's butter, you know, but without all the, I don't eat gluten anymore because my oldest actually has had celiac for a really long time. So bread just isn't a part of my life. So to be able to have that flavor of like the sweet cinnamon and butter without that is kind of fun.
It's very cool. So, okay. So, and I didn't know that about you until just now. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
Another synchronicity.
Yeah.
Right. So tell me, so one of the things that you said that many things, but there's two things I kind of want to focus on is in your journey. When you talk about living on the edge, living on the edge, and then we'll come back to the desire map. Mm-hmm. Desire mapping. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So let's start there. And where has that led you, and why has that kind of been instrumental?
Well, if you think about when someone says living on the edge and you think, oh my gosh, disaster, like that's somebody who's flirting with disaster. And I think I've come through several just experiences where I started and it was flirting with disaster, and it was like, but I felt compelled to go toward that edge, and I did, and it didn't work well. It didn't go well. And what I've continued to do is to go toward the edge, but not in the sense of, well, this is just how I live. I'm just going to be a disaster all the time. It's like I learned lessons from that, and now intentionally going toward the edge rather than just being like, let's just hope that I don't crash and burn. The Thelma and Louise kind of comes to mind, was more of my edge in the beginning. And now I feel more like, we kind of talked about the tarot. They refer to it as the fool's journey, and the fool approaches the edge knowing that the fool wants to go forward. And, you think of being foolish. Yeah, if you really were, careless and unintentional and just let the whims of the day take you, that could be a crash and burn. But I feel more like I'm trusting, and I feel a lot of faith as I approach the edge, that I've noticed that each time, even if I did fall, I strengthened some sense of myself that was able to rise back up again. And now I'm much more intentional, and I say, this is the edge I'm coming to, and I'm feeling through whether this is putting solid ground underneath me this time and this time and this time. So I feel like I'm operating more in a sense of trust and confidence, having seen those things come together eventually.
So let's give an example, right? So that it's easy for people, because what I'm seeing around is that all of us are going through, the world we live in is constantly changing, and there's so much stuff happening that's uncertain, right? So we could say that living on the edge is getting comfortable with making leaps forward that aren't, when they're full of uncertainty, but it's not crash and burn. It's taking that next step forward, even though it's scary or uncomfortable, and trusting that it's going to be the right next step.
Yeah, and I love that, because you say what's uncomfortable, and when we're comfortable and we're sitting and everything, the ground feels stable beneath us, we're also comfortable. I guess it becomes more of a process of getting comfortable with discomfort so that I'm not, how is this going to go? This is crazy and this is scary. I'm comfortable in that discomfort now, because I feel that I've been through the process, and I can tell the signals that are saying, hold back, take, So one example,
Sure.
you asked for. So this wasn't on a whim, but it was seemed very much on a whim. I purchased property in Hell, Michigan this summer. And part of that was a little bit of a statement about what our concept of fear and hell and the label of that made it so that it was actually very affordable for me to buy a little spot on a cove that is secluded and beautiful and has birds and wildlife, and it's very heavenly. And yet the concept is like, who would want to be in hell?
It's in Hell, Michigan, right?
It is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And part of that comes from my background of being in a very dominantly religious background. And when I educated my way out of that religion, I found that a lot of the labels and fears that I had embedded in me needed to be challenged. And so that's an edge I let myself be drawn toward. And there were moments, there was one moment in particular where I had gone, I'm not afraid of anything. Like I've seen all my fears happen and I'm still alive. And we're talking pretty big shifts in my life. And I was having one of those, like, I've learned so much that now I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to, really show what a woman can do. And within like a week, I was covered in poison ivy all over. And so I felt like, that was a lesson for me to say, maybe you should take pause. And I had seen lots of signs in nature telling me, slow down, like squirrels that were just about to run out in front of my car. And I'm thinking, they should just wait a second, And if I had listened to that, I would have been more deliberate in my approach and less frantic and like, hey, I'm going to control this. And I would have been softer and more patient. So
how interesting. So you mentioned, so tell us a little bit about the tarot. Because I know it's an area that you specialize in. I know nothing about it, and I'm just curious to know a little more.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I grew up in a really Orthodox background religiously. And when I was questioning that and having to challenge the beliefs that I had always held very, very dear to my heart, it was actually a pretty dark and terrible time in a lot of ways. And I really needed to have relief from that, feeling that everything was lost and destroyed. And, namely my faith, my spiritual structure. And
which is a big deal.
It was a pretty big deal. And so I felt drawn all my life. I grew up on a farm in Colorado, so I've always wandered out in nature, and I've always found everything I was looking for when I was wandering, kind of blind, And so I kind of started this process of what I call a blind find. Like if I closed my eyes, where am I being pulled toward? And one of those days I went to the bookstore and I was like, okay, I'm going to trust this whole thing. I'm going to just, what is the book that's going to provide me guidance and relief from this like loss of faith? And I wandered to the spot I pictured myself standing in front of, and then I was standing in front of it and I was like, that's tarot cards and books about witchcraft. And to go from being super Christian to that, it was too big a stretch. And so I went to a different section, which was, our intuition can tell us, that's okay. You're not ready for that. But eventually I did come back and kind of start to explore.
And so what was the book that
the book I found was called The Desire Map.
Okay.
And it's Danielle Laporte. And I was able to kind of have an entry point into intuitive listening and into intuitive goal setting, because her approach is very much what's your desired feeling, not what is the logistical data, like how much are you going to make, where are you going to live, when is the date, It was much more of like, how do you want to feel? And I knew I wanted to feel spiritually connected, again. And I knew I wanted to feel free. I don't know if, I mean, that's probably a whole other discussion, but having an authoritative approach to my spirituality, where a different authority who lives in a whole different state, who's an old man in a suit that has never met me, going from feeling like that was okay and that was actually pretty safe. But then when I felt like I guess I'm able to start this from scratch, so that means I would want to feel free to decide what
resonates with you.
Yeah, what resonates. And tarot kind of fell into it when I was ready. It came really intuitively. It's a very organized catalog of information. And so that's the information part. And the other part is the energy, right? And so you tap into your intuitive energy and you combine that with the catalog of information. And it has become a part of my spiritual practice where it helps me to solve my own riddles and without the drama of like the psychic that we all picture where it's like, there's the death card, dun, dun, dun. It's a little bit more peaceful. And even the negative cards, there's so much information behind that and so much beauty behind even the cards that could maybe have a dramatic scene on TV.
So a couple things. I did the desire map a couple years ago. I remember doing that, and it was so interesting to be asked those questions. Well, what do I desire?
Yeah.
Right? What does that look like? Because I came in the, traditional, go to school, get a corporate job, do blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And so very much in your head. Yeah. And so the last years since I went out on my own, I'm learning to be much more in my body, feel my body, be in my heart space. And to ask those questions, it's interesting to me how many people can't answer them.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one thing. And I would highly recommend that anybody listening who wants to have a new experience to check out that course. It's the Desire Map.
Yeah, Desire Map. And it has worksheets and lots of background and information to help you kind of get there and sort through that.
That was cool. And I also love cards.
Mm-hmm.
Angel cards, all kinds of guardian angel cards. But what I find, and why I love them so much, is that I'll just kind of like say, what do I need to know today? Mm-hmm. Open question. And regardless, I think regardless of your faith, there's a insight just reading it. I mean, if you just look at it as information, there's always something that I read that I hadn't thought about before, or a perspective I hadn't thought about it before that changes, that shifts me in a way that I find such an important part of living on the edge.
Yeah,
right?
I love that. Yeah, and I say that I came to tarot, but I came to tarot through oracle decks. The first one I bought was an oracle deck, and I think that's what you're referring to as cards like that. I think that's a really safe entry point for a lot of people because it's so informative without the attached legacy of the psychic sitting there and looking into a crystal ball and all of that sort of thing.
Right.
But they do go hand in hand. And so in my experience reading for myself and for others, they're so complementary, and it's, like I said, it's all information. And what we're looking for is the information that's going to bring clarity to our next right step forward. And I think that's why I love it so much for myself, because I can, maybe put out a spread or just even pull one card. And the feedback from my soul and my intuition as it, relates to what the information of that card or oracle meaning is, that's more information for me. Oh, this is how it felt.
And what I've been learning is when we can get out of our heads and into our bodies, right? These bodies are phenomenally sensitive and smart, right? And giving us
Yeah.
guidance, but we have to be willing to listen, to get quiet and listen. And so that information, what I find is it helps tap into my intuition. And so we live in a world of uncertainty that's changing all the time. And we've got this little voice that has had all those fear stuff all our lives, right?
Right. Right.
And so this is a way, it's a tool, if you will, that helps us to move out of that fear voice to move forward into taking the next steps that might be scary or they might be, but yet we know, you know when it's right for you.
I love that because fear is that topic came up a lot. I feel like when I first started to feel well within my soul, it was when I began operating out of love rather than fear. And that counterpart and allowing both of them to be still part of me, because fear is an important part of us. And it guides us and also prevents us from getting into any kind of trouble. But if we're operating all out of fear, what will the neighbors think? What will my parents think? Or, I should have this figured out better by now. That's fear. And that's a lot of lack mentality. Whereas moving forward out of love, it doesn't guarantee that I'm not going to fail. Going back to that quote, it's not going to guarantee that I've got it all figured out, but I know that I moved forward out of love. And to me, that just feels more aligned every time.
Right. So, absolutely. That's because at the end of the day, that's where, I don't know, that's where the joy is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the edge, I guess. That's the edge, is like, you can say that's a really big, scary space to be in, but to, you talked about what would I share with people is to just trust that moving forward with love is moving forward from your intuition. And how beautifully soothing is that to know at the end of the day, I didn't do this thing because someone said I should, or because I was terrified that I would be in trouble if I didn't, or people would think a certain thing if I didn't. It's just a very peaceful, aligned feeling to move through my intuition. So I guess getting back to the tarot, that taps into your intuition so thoroughly that it helps me to, I guess, check myself and say, am I, here's the energy of this spread that I just put out in front of me. And do I have this, confidence to focus on this energy today, knowing that this feels aligned and purposeful, and it can get I think it's difficult for some people, but I can say also that it's taken some time and some practice to get there. So that's a lot of practice and a lot of failing. Failing.
Exactly. And just, I guess, like you said, the intention, just continuing to show up.
Yeah.
Right. That's I've also learned is a big one. It's like, okay, we just have to show up where you are, and that's okay. Right?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened today, is just, show up, and we're among people who are talking about things that we really track with, and holistic approach to health, and a balanced approach to eating, people who share those, beautiful backgrounds that we're leaning into those directions. And
are also willing to sit with us if we want to eat Cheetos.
Yes. Right? Exactly. Or ice cream.
Right. Or whatever. Yeah. Or, the group talks about epic fails as well. And there's such a, I don't know, when you have a community and people are kind of like showing up with love, it's like, okay, so, pick up, get back up. How can we help you get back up? Because sometimes we need that too.
Showing up with love and not necessarily perfection. I don't think anyone goes into that group and is like, hey, everybody, I'm the expert on this. Everybody is really vulnerable. And they say, hey, my passion is this. And so I'm learning and researching and leaning into it, but nobody has a sense of, I've got it all figured out.
I've got it. Yeah, exactly. But we want to, right?
Yeah.
There's still a desire to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, well, it's been such a joy to be with you, Laurel. I'm going to do a little quick commercial for our sponsors for a shout out for Snedecor's Cleaners. I love them. They show up. I get a text and says, "Do I have anything to pick up?" And then I can text yes or no. And if it's yes, I drop my bag out on the doorstep and it shows up a couple days later, all pressed, clean, and ready to go. And it just feels great knowing that my clothes are actually better off than when I sent them in because of the processing that they do and the way they care for them. I just have adapted Snedecor's Cleaners as part of my self-care because it feels good when you know that you can always be ready to go on a moment's notice. So thank you, Snedecor's Cleaners. Okay, so I just always last. So when you say, in your journey, what have you found is something that somebody can do? They're just not feeling quite right. They're maybe anxious or unsettled or something. What would be something that you could suggest that where can somebody start to find that joy, if you will, or love just right now? What would be one little thing that you've found works for you?
You know what I think is really has guided me so much on this path is just trust the process and stay the course. And trusting the process of tapping in with your intuition could mean going for a walk and just trusting that an idea may come to you. Or maybe you go to a bookstore.
That's a great, what did you call it?
A blind find.
A blind find. I love
so
that.
So I do that in the forest and I'll find a feather or, even find something that pops into my mind. And my favorite really is to go to Ann Arbor, and there are a few used bookstores, and I'll go in or even other places where I've flown as a flight attendant where I'll just go find a used bookstore. And I'm not familiar with it, and so there's no way for my logic to really guide me. And it's a true, close your eyes and just pull to this thing. And I mean, I'm not going to go into detail, but every single time I found something that resonated with my soul to an extent that I felt, okay, I say lost in the right direction, is a term I heard a while back that it sticks with me, that at least I found this thing that encourages me forward again next time. So maybe not thinking so far into the future of, a person saying, I feel down and like I don't have direction. Don't get too far ahead of yourself and just take the next right step forward, even if it's a little inch of a pinky toe, knowing that your intuition will pull you each
to that
time.
Right thing.
Trust that. Yeah.
I love that. That's we went to. I love books. I'm an avid book person, and we were in Hawaii earlier this year, and I found a used bookstore, because I read through all my books on the flight there because it was long, and I had to buy a new suitcase.
Oh, just for the books?
Just for the books.
Oh, I love it.
Well, and a couple of grandkid purchases too for the grandkids. But that's one of the magic things of going into a place that you're not familiar with.
Yeah.
Because there's no path.
It's
right?
all new.
It's all new, and just guide me where to go. So
yeah, definitely. I graduated from Brigham Young University, and English was my focus of study. So I'm a big book fan and analyzer of books and poetry. And just today on my way to our group, I was thinking, would it be weird to have a little bookstore in my car to put my books in? And I thought, yeah, that's kind of weird. I'm sure you could just put it in a bin, because I cycle through them, and throughout the day I'll blind find. Even going back to this, I have a collection of vintage National Geographics, and this is kind of where my blind find started. Is I felt really drawn toward one of them one day, and it guided me. Essentially, the article was about the internal compass of a bird, which intuition is what is like an internal compass we're constantly calibrating, right? So anyhow, just to go back to that, I've always got a variety of options of what I feel drawn to read from. And
so that is so cool. I love that. So, okay. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad it worked out.
Yeah, it did.
It's been fun.
It did. Divine order. Okay. Thanks.